You can't drive down the east side without seeing the name Bobst, and both human and animal medical centers.
You don't have to walk very far around Manhattan to see the things that they've done that are a legacy in themselves.
I see Elmer and Dodo as real citizens of the world. I mean, that expression of put your money where your mouth is, they lived completely.
The foundation has made contributions that I believe have furthered world health.
Together, they made commitments early on that have been copied more recently by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, stating that people who have vast sums of money should be using the majority of that money to help other people. Mr. and Mrs. Bobst clearly made that decision 50 or 60 years ago.
My aunt, Mrs. Bobst, was born in Tripoli, Lebanon, 1925. My grandmother, Fikriya Sayed, was also an astute, powerful lady. She had presence. She walks in the room and everybody noticed. She was a great mother, a great wife. She kept, as Auntie will say, an antiseptically clean house. She had a lot of discipline. My grandfather was a peaceful, helpful, soft-spoken man. His pride and joy was Mamdouha. She was the eldest. She showed intelligence from a young age. She was quick on her feet, pretty like her mother, and he had great hopes for her.
وفعلا كان كتير مهم يعني إنه أول بنت بطرابلس بتسافر لبرا تتعلم برا.
She started as a student at AUB, getting her BA in 1947 in Arabic.
She goes to Libya roughly 1948 or 1949 to advise the newly independent Libyan government on public health issues.
She led a campaign in Libya to establish hospitals and a regular nursing program, developing a very powerful public health system.
She was pioneering, and she never made a big deal out of it.
Her first post at the UN was with the UNICEF. Then she contacted Rashid Karami, who was the prime minister at the time. He said to her, with all of what you've done so far, I think you're qualified to go to the United Nations and be a delegate there. So she was actually the youngest female delegate for Lebanon in the United Nations.
It was a great distinction for her. Of course, at the time, nobody had acquired that at all.
Mr. Bobst was born in the 1880s in Pennsylvania. His father was a Lutheran minister, and they didn't have too much money, and Elmer was forced to drop out of college before he graduated. He got most of his education sitting in libraries and reading books, so he had a tremendous commitment to education also. He was always interested in science and became a self-educated pharmacist. Early involvement with the pharmaceutical business sparked his interest in healthcare.
They had this tremendous charm. Lawrence Rockefeller once described him as the most knowledgeable layman, because he really did have an in-depth knowledge about medical affairs and science. But more importantly, he had this compassion for people and this drive to educate and to help other people understand.
While my aunt was working at the United Nations as a delegate, she had a party. At the time, Mr. Bobst was having dinner with Mary Lasker. He said, "Can I come along?" When my aunt opened the door and he saw her, he doesn't remember anything else after that.
When Dodo walked into her room, she was noticed. She had a presence. And then when she began to talk, her vocabulary was so precise, almost poetic.
He calls her the next day and says to her, "I am the uninvited guest. Do you know who I am?" And Auntie's friend, Najmuddin al-Rifai, Syrian diplomat, told her, "Do you know who he is? This is Elmer Bobst. I think you should at least meet with him." So she was intrigued and she accepted. And that was the start of their relationship.
She and her husband Elmer, they went to see my mother, my father. First, they were a little bit angry because she got married with an American one. But later, once they saw Elmer, they were so happy because he was a great man. Still now, we can say he was a great man, Elmer Bobst, really.
They met, they loved each other, and they had a beautiful time while they were together.
I don't think anybody loved anybody more than Dodo loved Elmer.
We loved our husbands, and we thought our duty to continue what they couldn't do anymore. It was a gracious living in a very simple way, and just for the pleasure of being together.
She knew Elmer so well, and they were so close that it was almost like one person thinking.
I'm not sure when Mr. Bobst first met Mrs. Bobst and ultimately married Mrs. Bobst, he knew and understood the wonderful partnership that was about to be started.
The Nixons and the Bobst were good friends.
Mr. President, I have Mr. Elmer Bobst returning your call.
All right. Hello. Elmer just called to wish you and Dodo a Happy New Year.
President Nixon was her witness for her to become a U.S. citizen, and that was a glorious day for my aunt. President Nixon was purely interested to know about the Middle East from a woman perspective and from an Arab perspective and from a Muslim perspective.
Happy New Year.
Well, Dodo, now you be sure that Elmer doesn't drive home tonight.
Absolutely, I will see to that.
During their friendship together, they had many discussions regarding the Middle East, and that influenced part of his policies.
He said that to help save the world, first there must be peace and then justice.
Because of my aunt's friendship with Tricia Nixon, she donated money to create Bobst Hall for Peace and Justice at Princeton University.
To attain the goal of peaceful coexistence in this troubled world of ours, education is the only answer.
She believed that the more you know about each other, you become more tolerant of each other.
Elmer Bobst was a Renaissance man, a true visionary, and he could see things that others couldn't see.
At one of the first meetings of the American Cancer Society, Mr. Bobst stood up and gave his speech, and he looked at the crowd and he pointed and said, "You'll have cancer, you'll have cancer, you'll not have cancer." And he was trying to imply that out of every 3 people, 2 will probably end up with cancer.
And I think everybody gravitated toward his courage and commitment. And he was the first to believe that we could really solve the cancer problem. He once said, "It may not happen in my lifetime, but it's going to happen."
Elmer was very influential in the American Cancer Society in the early days when it became apparent that tobacco was the cause of a lot of cancers.
So the vision was to have a national cancer control plan for the entire country. Legislatively, it was logjammed. And so he picked up the phone, called the White House, and talked to President Nixon.
When it was time to sign the bill, he actually took it himself and went there and said, "Sign it, we're done, let's put it together."
Had Elmer not intervened, it probably never would have come to pass, and we wouldn't have 40-plus comprehensive cancer centers in the country like we have today. It's a remarkable achievement.
Mamdouha Bobst, of course, has had a very long association with AUB.
She brought about a kind of medical alliance between our medical school at AUB and Memorial Sloan Kettering.
My aunt never forgot Lebanon. She wanted to help in any way she can, but in the right way. So her interests, like Mr. Bobst, were health and education, and she focused on that. So she started giving to American University of Beirut, the chemistry center, mammography equipment, radiology equipment, to the hospital. She created the breast center and also a fund for indigenous women from the north to get free diagnostics.
We established a scholarship program where AUB will identify the brightest of the bright with the idea to promote their career. We have already one graduate that we're all very proud of, Dr. Carla Haj.
Thanks to the Bobst Scholarship, I was accepted at MSKCC to do my residency in radiation oncology.
The doctors in training at the American University of Beirut are really at the edge of science, having the opportunity to discuss with the experts in the field of every disease.
I think this relationship that is developing, it's still in a developing stage, will significantly change the way cancer is cared for in the Mideast.
Instead of just absorbing research and knowledge from the West, this kind of partnership enables AUB and other universities to become centers of knowledge creation themselves in the Middle East.
Elmer loved books and was a product of books. I mean, he did not have a formal education, so he never forgot the importance of books. His seminal contribution to NYU was, of course, the library in which we are today.
About 5 years ago, a student guide was coming in with a batch of students and their parents, and he was saying, "This is the Bobst Library, this is the center of the university." And I was standing back in the corner smiling. I know that Elmer would have been proud to have heard that.
It's hard to imagine. Today, the NYU library has between 5 and 6 million volumes. But at that time, NYU's library was spread throughout the university. It took so long to get a single book, and you couldn't do what so many of us love, which is touch and feel and browse and look for a particular book, but see what books are next to it. After Elmer's death in 1978, one of the first things we began to talk about was what we now call here the wonderful gallery downstairs.
I am really deeply honored to receive this prestigious award from New York University.
After Elmer died in 1978, my aunt was devastated. She felt lonely. She felt not only lonely, she felt alone as well. Her vision in life after he passed away is to complete his mission and his vision and their legacy together. She felt strongly about that, and the years passed, and she would only do what they discussed and what he wanted, and then she would just embellish on that.
Mrs. Bobst's portrait is hanging here not only because the gallery is named after her, but also because the gallery was her idea.
There were card catalogs on the first floor of the library, and she was one of the first people to say, old-fashioned, 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 you know, the card catalog should be replaced. And then she said, that should be a place where we tell stories.
Mrs. Bobst's legacy, she would view first and foremost as a joint legacy of Mr. and Mrs. Bobst.
Mrs. Bobst wants to be remembered as someone who made a significant difference in the cancer problem.
I believe her legacy is very well felt in every patient that we can give a smile to, and every doctor that feel more proud of what they know.
Thanks to the scholarship, I was able to do my training in one of the best cancer centers in the world.
If my aunt would like to be known for one thing, it will be that she educated one more person and saved one more life.
Her commitment to public health education and her commitment to the worldwide fight against cancer will be her lasting legacy.
Devotion to causes that go way beyond the lifetime experiences of the two donors themselves is what she would like her legacy to be, and it will be, no question.
I want to be just like Auntie Dodo. She's nice, and I want to be just like her.
مدام بوبست بدنا نشكركم كتير.
Mrs. Bobst, thank you very much. We'll continue on doing what we have to do.